When I accepted the position at Whitefall Lodge, everyone in the culinary world treated it like I'd just been knighted. People dropped their voices reverently, the same way they do when talking about Michelin stars or rare wines. "The Whitefall Lodge?" they'd say. "Those billionaires practically eat gold up there." And they weren't wrong. Perched on a ridge in the Canadian Rockies, the resort looked less like a hotel and more like a glass cathedral carved into a glacier. Its chalets were all sleek Nordic timber and panoramic windows, illuminated at night like lanterns trapped in snow. The frozen lake below it was famous for its private ice skating paths, cleaned hourly by staff. The slopes above were patrolled exclusively by ex-military ski guards. I was the head chef, 34, childless, and with 2 decades of kitchens under my belt. My domain was the heart of the lodge, a massive open-concept kitchen overlooking the mountains. On most days, my responsibilities ran like clockwork. Oversee the brigade, approve every menu item, cater to absurd dietary demands. "I only eat beef from cows that listen to classical music," one oil tycoon said without irony. Smile politely while influencers filmed themselves critiquing food they didn't understand. And then, of course, there were the billionaires. God, the billionaires. Whitefall Lodge drew the kind of people who were used to the world bending to them. Hedge fund princes, crypto kings, celebrities with surgically refined faces that didn't move even when they screamed at the staff. One morning, I was delivering an amuse-bouche selection to a private chalet, a trio of foie gras macarons, when a tech mogul's wife waved the plate away like it offended her. "This is too brown," she said. "Do you have anything more aesthetic? You know, for photos?" The macarons had taken 4 hours to assemble. Another guest, a sealed-lipped politician with eyes like wet stones, complained that his baked Alaska wasn't flambéed at the table with enough enthusiasm. He told my sous chef that if he ever served something that boring again, he'd see to it that the lodge replaced everyone in the kitchen. Entitlement was the background noise here, a constant hum beneath the clinking champagne glasses and the drone of luxury heaters. Yet I endured it because the mountains made up for everything. In the early mornings, before anyone else was awake, I'd go outside with a mug of tea and watch the sun rise across the jagged horizon. The light would catch on the branches, turning them crystal white. The world felt still and pristine, untouched by the selfishness of the guests. I used to tell myself, if there's a place a person can start over, it's here, in the quiet, in the cold. But the cold was not quiet, not really. Not once you learned to listen. Sometimes, on nights when the wind cut hard across the ridge, it carried a strange sound, like distant breathing, a low, hungry exhale rolling over the drifts. The lodge staff joked about mountain ghosts. Ski patrol blamed pressure changes. I told myself it was just the weather. Still, I always felt something watching. Something old, something patient. At the start of peak season, that feeling was harder to ignore. The guests were particularly vicious, irritable, demanding, snapping at staff for microscopic inconveniences. And underneath their complaints was an odd kind of hunger, restlessness. They devoured food like they hadn't eaten in days, then complained they still felt empty. I noticed it first in the banker couple from Toronto. The husband tore through a 14-ounce bison steak in under 3 minutes, then asked if we had anything heavier. "Heavier?" I repeated. He nodded, shifting in his seat like his skin didn't quite fit. "Something that sticks to your ribs." His wife laughed like it was a joke, but her eyes darted away too quickly. Back then, I chalked it up to altitude or gluttony or the psychological effect of endless luxury. Nothing more. I didn't yet understand the hunger that lurked in these mountains. I didn't yet understand that Whitefall Lodge was built in the shadow of something that fed on more than flesh. And I didn't know, not until it was far too late, that it was only the beginning. I've worked enough holiday seasons to know that rich people behave the worst when they're at their happiest, or when they think they're supposed to be. The gala dinner was the crown jewel of Whitefall's winter schedule. A night of gold leaf hors d'oeuvres, champagne towers, and a 5-course tasting menu that took my entire kitchen brigade 12 hours to prep. By 6:30 that evening, the banquet hall shimmered like a lit cathedral of ice. Chandeliers glittered with frost-shaped crystals. The panoramic windows reflected guests in sequined gowns and designer tuxedos, all of them adoring only themselves. A soft quintet played near the fireplace. A group of prodigies flown in from Montreal paid a small fortune to perform for people who would barely listen. I stayed in the kitchen as usual. The air was humid with steam, herbs, and the metallic whisper of knives against cutting boards. My sous chef Cassie was giving instructions to two new apprentices who still flinched whenever a celebrity wandered too close to the pass window. Meanwhile, the servers trickled in and out, balancing trays of amuse-bouches while dodging comments from inebriated billionaires. Complaints about portion size, temperature, the altitude making them puffy, or why their caviar wasn't the brand they demanded even though it was. I plated a row of venison tartare on chilled marble, wiped the edges, and nodded to Damien, our head waiter. He swept them away toward a table of influencers live-streaming the whole experience. "Chef," Cassie murmured, "we're getting requests for substitutions again." "Which table?" "The venture capital guy. The one with the red scarf." "Of course," I muttered. He was allergic to everything except attention. Before I could indulge my sarcasm further, the room trembled. Just a slight vibration. Enough for the overhead copper pots to rattle, but subtle enough that I might have questioned whether I imagined it. Then the second tremor hit. Harder, strong enough to send a rack of sheet pans shuddering and to make every member of my crew look up in unison. "What the hell?" Cassie whispered. I stepped out from behind the line and pushed open the swinging door to the hallway that led toward the banquet hall. The music had stopped. Guests were murmuring, confused, annoyed rather than frightened, because the wealthy don't believe anything bad can actually happen to them. The floor quaked again, a long rolling shiver that made champagne flutes clatter and sway. Snow slid loudly across the roof overhead like a tidal wave brushing past. Then came the sound. A roar that did not belong to wind. A deep primal rupturing growl of the earth itself. The windows in the banquet hall went white. Not frost, snow. A wall of it. As if some giant had thrown a glacier against the side of the lodge. People screamed. Chandeliers crashed down. The entire structure groaned like a dying animal. I stumbled back into the kitchen just as the emergency lights flickered. Once, twice, then died completely. Darkness swallowed us. A few staff shrieked. Pots clanged, someone fell. A violent whump rolled through the building, followed by the unmistakable crunch of timber and metal folding under impossible force. "Avalanche," someone yelled. Not just any avalanche. The kind that buries towns, not just ski slopes. A second impact slammed into us from the eastern wing. Plates flew from shelves. My knives crashed to the floor. I braced myself against the steel counter as a cacophony of splintering wood and twisting beams echoed through every hallway of Whitefall Lodge. Then silence. Cold, total, unnatural silence. Our power was gone. The backup generators didn't kick in. The radios on the wall emitted nothing but dead static. I groped my way toward the emergency supply closet and tore it open, retrieving flashlights and headlamps. Cassie followed, breathing in quick bursts, face pale even in the dim glow. "Chef, we're cut off." I nodded. "We need to check on the guests. Let's move." We emerged into the hall where a handful of staff and vacationers wandered like dazed ghosts. Snow had sealed every door and window visible from the inside. The few lights from smartphones glowed against panicked faces. One of the resort managers, a tall, stiff man named Victor, ran toward us, clutching a tablet that couldn't connect to anything. "A total collapse," he said breathlessly. "The avalanche wiped out the service road, the lift line, and the main access tunnel. The radio tower's gone." "Emergency beacon?" I asked. "Buried. And helicopters?" He just shook his head. "Blizzard coming in. Whiteout conditions for days." Guests were already demanding answers. Demanding warmth, demanding comfort. Yelling for champagne refills, of all things. The kind of fear that makes rich people violent was beginning to simmer. The fear they aren't in control. I looked toward the panoramic windows. They were cracked, bowed inward by the snow pressing from outside. No stars, no moon, no sky. Just a continuous wall of shifting oppressive white. It stretched upward like the mountain had swallowed us whole. I took a breath, steadying myself. Whitefall Lodge, once a palace for the elite, had become a frozen tomb. The first night after the avalanche felt like being trapped inside a dying animal. Warmth draining, joints stiffening, breath turning shallow. By midnight, the temperature in the lodge had dropped to near freezing. Without power, the fireplaces were our only heat, but they were built for ambience, not survival. They popped and sputtered, throwing weak orange light across terrified, overdressed millionaires huddled under designer fur coats that had never touched real cold before. The storm outside raged like an unending scream, the wind hammering fists of snow against the windows until the glass wavered in its frames. And the lodge, built to withstand nature, seemed to groan in protest. We gathered everyone in the Great Hall, the largest open space, so we could monitor injuries and keep people from wandering off. Someone had already tried to pry open a service door and nearly froze their fingers off. Victor, our panicked manager, was trying to recite safety protocols from memory, his voice trembling. No one was listening. The wealthy do not respect protocol unless it serves them. They shouted over him, "When will the snowplows reach us? My battery is at 7%. Someone find a charger. Get us blankets. Get us more firewood. I paid $60,000 for this vacation." Cassie leaned close to me. "They're going feral," she whispered. "Stay calm." I told her, though my heart was hammering, "We need to keep morale stable." At around 1 a.m., I returned to the kitchen to take stock of our food situation. And that's when the true unease began. The air inside the walk-in freezer was wrong, too warm. And it smelled off, not of decay exactly. Something sharper, metallic, like blood left in the snow. When I flicked on my flashlight, my heart dropped. The frozen shelves of meat, elk, beef, lamb, salmon, were glistening with a slick sheen of thaw. The ice was melting. The plastic vacuum seals bulged. Some had ruptured entirely. That much thawing should have taken a full day without power. This had happened in less than 3 hours. I noticed the produce: greens wilting into black mush, fruit erupting with fuzzy mold. Bread we baked that afternoon had already begun to collapse into soft, sour-smelling ruin. I checked another shelf. The dairy had curdled. Eggs oozed sulfur through their shells. A wheel of truffle brie had liquefied, dripping like spoiled fat across the floor. It looked like rot accelerating, bubbling up from some unseen infection. Cassie stood beside me now, covering her mouth with her sleeve. "What is this? How does food go bad this fast? The freezer shouldn't even be this warm." "It's impossible," I whispered, but the stink said otherwise. We salvaged what we could, moving the few intact items into metal coolers packed with what little clean snow we could gather. But even the snow felt strange, slushy and too warm, as if touched by something deeper than temperature. By the time we returned to the Great Hall, the atmosphere had shifted. Not just panic, something worse. People were whispering, but not all of the voices belonged to people. I saw it in their faces first, the hollow, sunken-eyed look of those who'd gone too long without eating. But it had only been a few hours. The body doesn't starve that fast. Not truly. Yet their hands trembled, their lips cracked. They stared at each other with a kind of tense, feral interest. A hedge fund manager, Mr. Dane, paced by the far fireplace, muttering to himself. "He keeps saying my name." "Who?" I asked gently. He looked at me with pupils dilated like a drug addict's. "The man outside." "There's no one outside," I said. He shook his head violently. "No, not a man. Something else. I hear him when the wind gets close to the glass. He tells me he knows I'm hungry." My stomach tightened. "You're just scared," I soothed. "Your mind is reacting to shock." But he grabbed my wrist, desperate. "You don't understand, Chef." His voice comes from inside the snow. Before I could respond, a woman nearby started sobbing hysterically, clutching her stomach. "I feel so empty," she cried. "I ate 2 hours ago and it feels like I haven't eaten in days." Another guest shouted for food. Another shoved a server to the floor demanding anything edible. Someone smashed open the minibar and began tearing at packets of almonds with their teeth. A young influencer pulled at her own hair, wild-eyed. Why am I starving? Why does it hurt? Cassie stood beside me, skin pale. Chef, are you hearing any of this? Of course, I said. No, she said. I mean the whispers, the voice they keep talking about. I blinked. No, nothing. She stared at me as if she expected me to be lying. But I wasn't. Whatever was speaking to these people, whatever was clawing its way into their hunger, it wasn't speaking to me. A wealthy tech mogul suddenly screamed in rage, flipping a table. People backed away, shouting. Panic was spreading like wildfire. But underneath it, underneath the fear, something darker was blooming. By the following morning, Whitefall Lodge felt like it had slipped a little off the map of reality. The storm still shrieked against the windows, but inside the halls, something far worse had settled. A kind of crawling tension beneath the skin, an ugly awareness that the people around you weren't just frightened anymore. They were hungry, and not in any way I recognized. I went to the kitchen at dawn to check the food again. I didn't wake Cassie or Jonah. No point in scaring them more than they already were. The moment I stepped inside the walk-in freezer, I froze. Someone or something had scratched deep gouges into the metal door. I traced the letters with my gloved fingers. Eat what the mountain gives. Another line beneath it, jagged and frantic. Follow the voice that calls your name. The grooves were deep enough to have been carved with a knife or claws. The thought made my skin tighten painfully. I backed away, flashlight trembling in my hand. Who did this? I whispered to the empty room. My breath puffed out in a white cloud. No answer, just the faint drip of thawing meat behind me. I shut the freezer door hard and locked it. Not that it would keep anything out or anything in. The great hall was quieter than before. Not calmer, just depleted. People conserving energy. They huddled around fireplaces that barely held flame, staring at the floor, clutching their stomachs as if afraid it might open up and swallow them whole. The hunger had become a physical weight in the room, pressing down, wringing them out. Some whispered to themselves. Some flinched at nothing. Some stared longingly at each other with eyes that had begun to hollow. And in the middle of it, pacing like a man walking the edge of a cliff, was Brian Halford, the banker. His eyes were barely blinking, red-rimmed, darting around like something inside him wanted out. I approached him slowly. Brian, where's your wife? He looked up at me with pupils blown wide. She's gone. His voice cracked. She's gone, chef. She's gone. She went outside. I saw it take her. A dozen heads turned. My stomach dropped. Brian, I said softly. The blizzard. She couldn't have gone outside without leaving tracks. No one could have. She was in the glass sauna. His voice trembled violently. I went to check on her. She said she was dizzy, that she was hearing things. She felt watched. He swallowed thickly. When I got to the sauna, she wasn't alone. The room went silent. Even the storm seemed to hush against the windows. Brian's breath hitched. What I saw standing outside, it wasn't human. Tell me, I said. He lifted a shaking hand, pointing upward slightly. It was tall, too tall, maybe 7 feet, thin like a starving man. Its ribs, you could count them through the skin. People were listening now, every eye on him. It had antlers, he whispered, voice cracking. Huge, frost-covered antlers that scraped the sauna roof. They were made of ice. A murmur of fear rippled through the hall. I saw its breath, Brian continued, fogging the glass. He shuddered violently, and it tapped on the window with fingers like bones. Someone gasped. Someone else swore softly. When I opened the door, he said, voice breaking, Kelly was gone. Gone how? I pressed. He exploded suddenly. I don't know. His voice ricocheted off the rafters, sending people flinching backward. She's gone, he shrieked. And the thing stared at me. It stared at me with no eyes. He grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise. It told me I wasn't hungry enough yet. A few guests cried out. A woman vomited. Brian leaned in, shaking, breath sour with fear. It told me her bones were too soft for the mountain. I pulled my arm free. Brian, listen to me. You need rest. You're in shock. No, he said, deadly quiet. Then, he leaned close enough that I could smell blood on his breath. She called my name last night. I stiffened. Kelly, he shook his head. The voice, he whispered. The one in the walls. The one telling us to eat. You hear it too, don't you? No, I said firmly. I hear nothing. He blinked like he didn't understand the words. Why? Why not you? His expression twisted in a way that made my stomach drop. You're not starving like the rest of us. A ripple of unease spread among the guests. Eyes turned toward me. Suspicious, hungry. I stepped back. Cassie showed up behind me just in time, her hand touching my elbow. Chef, she whispered urgently. We need to go now, because Brian wasn't just staring at me. He was snarling, and others had started to look at me the way wolves look at a deer caught in deep snow. The hunger was becoming something else, and it was spreading. It was the kind of night where even the storm seemed to be holding its breath. No rattling windows, no howling wind. Just a suffocating, unnatural hush. That's what woke me. Silence, thick and wrong. Then came the sound. A wet, rhythmic gnawing. At first, half asleep, I assumed it was the pipes straining again. But when I sat up, heart pounding in my throat, Cassie was already standing over my cot, shaking. Chef, she whispered, voice trembling. Evelyn, get up. Something's in the East Hall. Jonah appeared behind her. Pale, clutching a fireplace poker like he wasn't sure whether to use it or hide behind it. It's Brian, he choked out. It has to be. I don't even know what I heard. I snatched my coat, flashlight, and led the way down the back corridor. The hall was freezing, colder than the storm outside, like the temperature had dropped 20 degrees in minutes. And the sound was getting louder. Crunch, tear, wet chewing, a low animal growl. It echoed through the empty hallway, filling every space, even the air I breathed. I realized then that no ordinary mouth could make those sounds. We reached the banquet hall doors. They were ajar, just enough to let a thin reddish smear seep under the sliver. Jonah muttered and crossed himself. I pushed the door open. The world stopped. The lanterns we'd set earlier were still flickering, weak and amber. The nearest one tipped sideways on a broken table, shining its trembling light across the floor. And in that cone of soft, quivering light was Brian Halford. He was crawling on all fours, bent backward at the waist like a marionette pulled by tangled strings. His face was buried in something on the floor, something that no longer looked human. The smell hit next, copper, rot, and something else like meat left in a snowbank too long. Brian jerked upward suddenly, head snapping toward us, jaw slick with gore. Chef, he rasped, voice warped, thick. I didn't mean. She told me. His mouth hung open unnaturally wide. Bits of hair stuck between his teeth. Cassie whimpered behind me. Only then did the lantern's failing light illuminate what he'd been feeding on. Kelly Halford, or what remained. From the waist up, she was nearly untouched. Her skin pale, eyes open in frozen terror. But everything below the ribcage, it looked like something had burrowed into her, hollowing her out like a carcass. Bones jutted at impossible angles. Her legs were chewed down to the bone. Brian let out a wet sob. She said it was all right, he gasped, voice breaking into a guttural growl. She said she wasn't cold anymore. She said the wind told her it was time. He dug his fingers into the blood-soaked carpet and arched violently. The voice said she belonged to the mountain, he spat. Said I had to take her inside to keep her warm. He pounded his fist against his chest. She's inside me now. Cassie stumbled back and dry-heaved. Jonah whispered, we need to lock him up, before we can't. Brian lunged forward then. Not at us, but at Kelly's remains, as if he'd been momentarily distracted from his meal. "Stop!" My voice cracked like a whip. He froze. Then slowly, painfully, he turned his head toward me. His eyes were black, like something inside had eaten the irises. The voice said, "You don't hear it," he hissed. "You will soon." Jonah and I moved in tandem. We grabbed him under the arms. He was shockingly light, as if hunger had hollowed him out from the inside. Brian thrashed, snarled, bit at the air. "You can't hide from him," he gurgled. "He's already inside the walls. He knows who's next." "Shut up," Jonah snapped, voice shaking. "Just shut up." But Brian didn't shut up. As we dragged him down the servant's stairwell, his voice grew shrill, hysterical. He's coming for all of you. The cold is his breath. The hunger is his hand. The antlers are the crown. The mountain wakes." We threw him into one of the unused basement storage rooms. Thick concrete walls, steel door, the closest thing to a cell Whitefall Lodge had. Jonah locked all 3 bolts. Then, he leaned against the door and covered his face with his hands. The moment the bolts clicked, Brian stopped screaming. Silence except for a soft scraping. I backed away from the door as the cold pressed in around us like a living thing. Kelly's body was still upstairs. But whatever Brian had become, it was already something else. And I had the sickening feeling that confining him wouldn't stop whatever had entered him. I barely slept after they locked Brian in the basement utility room. The whole lodge felt like it had shifted during the night. Timbers creaking as if something heavy prowled along the roof. Every time I drifted off, I dreamed of chewing sounds coming from somewhere close, then snapped awake gasping. When the weak morning light finally seeped through the frost-coated windows, I forced myself up. The kitchen smelled wrong, like damp fur and copper. I tried to shake it off. Lack of sleep, stress, that's all. But when I walked past the hallway leading down to the basement, my stomach tightened. The air there felt colder than the rest of the powerless lodge, colder than even the freezers had been before they died. My breath plumed white. Something was wrong. I descended the stairs slowly, one hand tracing the railing. The door to Brian's makeshift cell stood in the dim corridor like a waiting mouth. I heard nothing behind it. No pacing, no muttering, no whimpering. Just stillness. "Brian," I called, voice cracking. "We brought breakfast." I unlocked the bolt with hands that trembled more than the cold explained. The door swung inward. The room was empty. No, not empty. It was wrecked. The cot was overturned. The chain we'd secured to the radiator was snapped like candy wire. The walls showed smear marks of blackened frost where his hands had clawed. A rigid draft seeped through a crack in the foundation. A crack that hadn't been there last night. "How?" Cassie whispered behind me. She'd followed silently, clutching a flashlight. "He couldn't have." Tom, the handyman, ran a shaking hand through his hair. The door was bolted, and the chain, he wasn't strong enough to. "There's no way." I felt the weight of their eyes on me, as if I had an answer. I didn't, but something inside me whispered, "He didn't get out." Something got him out. I backed away from the room. The cold emanating from it wasn't natural. It was dead, metallic cold. The kind you'd find in the hollow of a snowdrift where animals had been stripped clean. I didn't tell them that. Upstairs, morning chaos had already begun. Vacationers paced the lobby in frantic circles, their designer coats unzipped, their faces drawn and irritated. 2 men were arguing over the last working lantern. Someone else was shouting at Jenna, demanding to know how long before the generators magically fixed themselves. A woman cried openly near the dead fireplace. Every one of them looked paler than the day before, and hungrier. They'd eaten the breakfast rations in minutes. Some demanded seconds. Others stared at the empty platters with a quiet, obsessive intensity that made my skin crawl. Then came the moment. I was wiping frost from the dining hall window when I felt the hair lift on the back of my neck. A feeling like breath, cold as the grave, passed over my shoulder. I turned. Outside, half hidden by drifting snow, stood a figure. Gaunt, horrifically tall. Its limbs were wrong in a way I couldn't name. Too long, too sharp. Its skin hung like wet parchment. Its ribs jutted like a cage trying to burst outward, and crowning its skull were antlers that looked like glass sculpted from ice, branching upward in fractal curves. And it wore something. Shredded flannel. Brian Halford's flannel. For a full second, it stared through the glass straight into my soul. Its eyes empty, hungry voids. Then it tilted its head in a jerky, curious motion, as though studying me, recognizing me. I stumbled back so fast I knocked over a stack of metal trays. Tom rushed in. What happened? I pointed at the window. Something outside. But when he looked, the snow-blurred hillside was empty, except for the storm-torn pines swaying like skeletons in the wind. Tom put a hand on my shoulder. Evelyn, none of us are sleeping well. The cold, the stress, it plays tricks. But I knew what I'd seen. By afternoon, it became clear the vacationers weren't themselves. A hedge fund manager shoved another guest out of the way to get a bowl of thinning soup. A middle-aged woman screamed at me because the bread was stale, and then, disturbingly, began eating it anyway, gnawing it like an animal even as she sobbed. Arguments turned to shoving. Someone threw a chair. Someone else tried to steal a raw potato from the pantry, and was dragged back by two furious guests who swore he'd taken more than his share. I tried to intervene to calm them, but their eyes, their pupils were dilated, unfocused. Their skin was taking on that same gaunt tightness I'd seen outside. And every time the wind howled through the broken eaves, several guests turned their heads all at once, like they were listening to something I couldn't hear. I wanted so badly to believe it was just fear, hunger, stress, ordinary human panic, that nothing supernatural had followed us from the avalanche's wake. But as the blizzard swallowed the daylight early and the lodge groaned beneath its weight, a single thought lodged itself in my mind like a thorn. The thing outside isn't the only one that's hungry. Something is waking inside these people. It began with a scream, not a panicked shout or a cry for help, but the wet, tearing howl of someone losing the last sliver of their humanity. I was in the lobby with Cassie, trying to hand out cups of melted snow water, when an influencer in a fur vest suddenly lunged at a young ski instructor. No warning, no argument. He just attacked. He tackled the instructor to the floor, teeth snapping, fingers digging into his throat. Cassie gasped. What the hell? We sprinted toward them, but three other guests were faster. Not to help the victim, but to drag an influencer away from their food. They fought like dogs. No words, only snarls. A man in expensive hiking boots turned on his own son, knocking him backward into a pillar. A hedge fund manager bit into the shoulder of a woman who'd once been laughing over cocktails just 2 days ago. Someone hurled a lamp across the room, shattering it into sparks that died uselessly on the frozen floor. Chaos erupted in seconds. Pure, unfiltered madness. The wealthy elite of Whitefall Lodge ripped into each other with a desperation that didn't belong to hunger or fear. It belonged to something else. Something ancient pressing on their minds like a thumbprint in soft clay. The whites of their eyes darkened first. Then the irises dissolved like ink swirling into water, leaving only glossy black voids that reflected the dim emergency lantern light. Not human eyes. Predator eyes. Cassie grabbed my arm. Eve, we need to go fast. We ducked under a swinging chair someone had hurled like a weapon. Blood splattered across my cheek. Hot. Metallic. Not mine. I didn't look back. 2 guests barreled toward us, hands clawing, jaws unhinged too wide to be natural. Cassie slammed a serving tray into one of their faces. The sound was nauseating, a blend of crunch and wetness. I yanked her down a side hallway as they writhed on the ground. Behind us, the lobby deteriorated into a full slaughterhouse. More screams, the thick, meaty sound of flesh tearing. A gurgling plea that cut off abruptly. Someone was laughing. A high-pitched broken giggle that didn't belong to anyone sane. I swallowed hard, forcing my feet to move faster. The corridor shook as bodies slammed against walls. The smell of blood mixed sickeningly with the scent of spoiled meat drifting from the kitchen. We reached the East Wing access door. Cassie practically shoved me through. Help me barricade it. Together we dragged a heavy oak bench across the frame. My muscles burned. Cassie piled a storage cabinet on top of it, then wedged a fallen coat rack between the handles. On the other side of the door, footsteps grew louder, then a low growl. Something slammed into the door so hard the wood bowed inward. Cassie flinched but kept working. She jammed a fire extinguisher into the gap under the hinge. Come on, she muttered. Hold, damn it. Another crash, then scratching. Long, slow, deliberate scratching like nails or bone dragging across the wood. Testing it, savoring it. I pressed my back to the barricade, breath clouding in the freezing air. Cassie joined me. They've gone insane, she whispered. This is like rabies or... No, I said quietly. Her eyes met mine, wide, terrified. This isn't sickness, I continued. Something is in them. The door jolted violently, knocking both of us forward. A hand, pale, blood-smeared, reached through the small crack near the frame, fingers snatching at the air. Cassie yelped and slammed her boot against it, until the hand withdrew with a sickening crunch. I pushed the cabinet harder against the door. We can't stay here. If they break through. They won't, Cassie said, though her voice trembled. This is the Eastern Wing. They don't know it well. Maybe they'll get distracted. Maybe they'll eat each other before they reach us. A horrifyingly plausible thought. I slid to the floor, adrenaline burning out into trembling exhaustion. Cassie sat beside me, wiping blood from her hands. From the hallway beyond the barricade came muffled wet chewing. Someone was feasting on someone else. Cassie covered her ears, eyes squeezed shut. God, please make it stop. The screams from the West Wing faded to sporadic echoes. Sometimes distant, sometimes terrifyingly close. But the quiet that replaced them was worse. It felt listening, as if something vast and ancient lingered just beyond the thin drywall. We were weakening fast. Cassie divided the rations evenly on a scratched room service tray. 2 protein bars, 3 apples, softening and browning, half a plastic container of trail mix, and a single instant coffee packet we couldn't heat. That was all we had left. She slid my portion to me. Eat slowly, make it last. But the moment I bit into the apple, I felt how wrong it was. The inside was mealy sour, spoiling, just like everything else in the lodge. There was no mold, no rot, just a strange degradation, as if the life had been pulled out of it. Cassie spit hers out after one bite, hunched over, pale. We can't survive like this, she whispered, wiping her mouth. This isn't natural, Eve. I didn't argue. My stomach churned from hunger that felt too sharp, too sudden, like a blade scraping the inside of my ribs. We sat in one of the employees' bunk rooms, wrapped in blankets, listening to the wind beat against the building like fists. The barricade we'd built groaned with every gust, and sometimes the metal frame shuddered. Once from the wind, once from something that brushed against it, something testing. Cassie flinched each time. Her nerves were fraying. Her fingers trembled constantly. She hadn't slept more than a few minutes at a time, waking up with a gasp, clutching her head like something inside was clawing at her skull. I tried to steady her as best I could. She tried to hide it, but the hunger was eating her alive. I woke to quiet sobbing. Cassie sat on the edge of her bunk, arms wrapped tightly around herself, hair sticking to her face with sweat. Moonlight from the frosted window cast her silhouette in trembling silver. Cass, I whispered. She turned her head, but not fully, as if afraid to move too fast. Her eyes looked sunken and darker. Evelyn, her voice cracked. I have to tell you something. I sat up slowly. Okay. She swallowed so hard her whole throat moved. I can hear it. The room went still. Hear what, Cassie? The hunger. A shudder ran through her. It keeps saying my name. It's soft like a lullaby, but I can't make it stop. Every time I close my eyes, it feels like something is kneeling beside the bed, whispering from the dark. My heart dropped. Cassie, look at me. But she shook her head violently. No, listen. Please, I have to get this out." She pressed her hands to her ears as if trying to block out a phantom noise. "I didn't want to tell you. I tried so hard to push it away. But today, when we passed through this bloodbath," she covered her mouth, fighting a sob. "I wanted to taste it, Evelyn. I wanted to eat them." My lungs froze. I crawled down from my bunk and took her shoulders gently. "Cassie, you are not like them. You're fighting. That's what matters." "No, Eve," she whispered, leaning her forehead against mine. "I'm losing." Her breath trembled against my skin. "And I'm so scared of what I'll do when I lose." I held her tightly. "We'll get out of this. I promise you, Cass." She pulled away abruptly, eyes shining with a pain I didn't understand. "No, I won't let myself become a monster." She stood too fast, knocking over her water bottle. It rolled across the floor, clattering loudly. I reached for her wrist. "Cassie, wait." But the look she gave me stopped my breath. A kind of peace. Terrifying, absolute. "I love you, Eve," she said quietly. "You're the strongest person I've ever met. Cassie, please don't." She stepped back, toward the dark doorway that led to the maintenance stairs, toward the window that overlooked the frozen lake. And I understood too late. "Cassie!" She ran. I chased her, boots pounding against the cold tile. She reached the end of the hallway, shoved open the window, and in the moment before she slipped out into the snowstorm, she whispered, "Better this way." Her silhouette vanished into the white blizzard. I screamed her name until my voice cracked, but the storm swallowed every sound. I pulled myself back into the room eventually, trembling uncontrollably, snow melting in my hair. I slammed the window shut and collapsed on the floor, sobbing until my chest ached. The east wing felt colder now, more hollow, as if something had been waiting for this moment. The wind outside shifted, softened, like a sigh of satisfaction. And for the first time since the avalanche, I thought I heard something in it. Just a faint thread of sound, my name. I pressed my hands hard against my ears. "No," I choked. "Not me. Not me." Time wasn't on my side. The barricades rattled every hour. The shadows in the hallway flickered and stretched in ways light shouldn't allow. Footsteps. Bare, frantic, animal-like, skittered through the floors above and below. Possessed guests roamed freely now. Dozens of them. Twisted silhouettes clawing through rooms, smashing against locked doors, dragging their nails along the walls as they searched for anything warm, anything human. I had maybe hours left before they found a way through the barricade. I had no food, no help, and something inside me, something small but growing, was beginning to whisper. I forced myself to inhale slowly, grounding myself, repeating the same sentence each time the panic swelled. "I am still Evelyn. I am still human." I had to make risky decisions. I had nothing to lose. At dawn, though daylight barely pierced the storm, I stumbled to the kitchen. The place looked like a war zone. Broken plates, shredded linens, blood smeared over stainless steel like fingerprints of madness. But the propane lines still worked, barely. The backup tanks, used for outdoor grills and emergency heating, were stacked in the dry storage room. 6 of them, heavy and dust-coated. I did the math. If I rigged the lines together, opened the valves, let the gas fill the main lodge, I could burn the entire infected horde in one blast. I could end Whitefall's nightmare. I could stop the wendigo spread. But only if I got every last one of them into the main lobby. That meant baiting them. I wasn't proud of what I did next. I dragged kitchen ladles, metal bowls, empty pans into the main hall, tying strings around them and leading the lines back through the service tunnel entrance. If I shook the cords, they'd crash and clang like a dinner bell. In a place overrun by ravenous monsters, sound was irresistible. I worked until my fingers bled from gripping metal, until the frost bit at my cheeks so hard I felt nothing, until the gas smell grew thick enough to sting my eyes and burn my throat. I opened every valve. I smashed the glass on the emergency heaters. I rewired the spark igniter near the main chandelier. Jerry-rigged, unpredictable, exactly what I needed. Then, heart hammering, I crawled into the service tunnel. a narrow concrete throat that connected the kitchen to the loading bays. From the darkness, I began to pull the strings. One pan clattered, then another. Then a whole line of metal cookware crashed to the ground like the opening volley of battle. For a moment, silence. Then I heard them, feet dragging, hands scraping, bodies stumbling and rushing toward the sound. Growls that weren't quite human. Sharp inhalations like animals scenting prey. The soft clack of teeth. I held my breath. They poured into the main hall. Uncoordinated but hungry, desperate, twitching in their skeletal forms. Some still wore shredded couture gowns and half-torn suits. Others had stretched jawlines and distorted limbs, features warped beyond recognition. And at the center, moving with a slow, deliberate gait, the thing that had once been Brian Halford. Antlers of ice, skin stretched over bones like wet parchment, eyes empty as the blizzard sky. He sniffed the air, then snapped his head toward the chandelier, toward the faint spark from my makeshift igniter. I whispered, "Come on, take it." The igniter clicked. A spark jumped. The chandelier dropped a single glowing ember into the air, and the world turned white. The blast hit with the force of a freight train. A wall of heat slammed into the service tunnel, flinging me backward. The world roared with a sound that wasn't quite fire, but something deeper, almost like a howl. A death scream, the wendigo scream. I curled into a ball, arms over my head, as flames rolled through the hall, sucking oxygen from my lungs. The propane tanks blew next, each explosion punctuated with shattering timbers and collapsing beams. For a moment, I thought the entire mountain range shook. The tunnel ceiling rained dust and broken concrete. A beam grazed my shoulder, sending pain lancing down my arm. My jacket caught fire at the edges. I smothered it desperately with my bare hands, blistering the skin instantly. Black smoke filled my throat. My ears rang so loudly I couldn't hear my own ragged breaths. But I was alive. I crawled toward the loading bay exit, lightheaded, coughing, half-blind, until the cold night air slapped me across the face like a bucket of ice. I collapsed into the snow, gasping. Behind me, Whitefall Lodge burned. The entire main structure had become a tower of flame, roaring against the storm like a funeral pyre for every soul inside. The whispers stopped. A silence fell so deep it felt like the mountain exhaled. The storm eased. The sky lightened. Snow still fell, but gently now, soft flakes settling like ashes. I rolled onto my back, every bone shaking. Above the burning heap that had once been the most luxurious resort in the Rockies, a shape moved. High up on the ridge, it stood against the rising sun. Tall, skeletal, crowned with antlers that glimmered like icicles catching light. The ancient hunger. It turned its head toward me, slowly, almost thoughtfully. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. We stared at each other across the snowfield. And then, it stepped backward into the drifting sunlight and vanished, like a shadow losing form when the fire dies. I lay there, smoke-stained and shaking, feeling the warmth of dawn creep toward me through the cold. For the first time since the avalanche, I let myself hope I would see another day. I don't remember collapsing. I barely remember the hours after the explosion. My memories smear together like wet paint. Snow, smoke, a faint ringing in my skull, and something warm trickling down my face that turned out to be my own blood. But I do remember the first voice I heard cutting through the cold. "We found someone. Over here. Over here. She's breathing." Hands, gloved, shaking from cold, lifted me carefully from the snowbank where I'd passed out. I felt my body tilt weightless as I was placed on a stretcher. Someone pressed 2 fingers against my neck. "She's hypothermic. She's burned." "No, both." "Jesus Christ, what happened here?" I forced one eye open. Above me, white sky, blizzard softening, helicopter blades beating overhead like mechanical wings. I tried to speak. "Whitefall, the wendigo, he." My voice cracked, throat raw from smoke. A medic leaned closer. "It's okay. You're safe now. Don't talk." But I had to. I grabbed his jacket weakly, fingers trembling. They weren't animals. They were people. They were. He pried my hand off gently. You're confused. You've been through something. I turned my head toward the blackened crater, a smoking skeletal pit. Steel beams curled like ribs. Charred glass scattered across the snow like blackened hailstones. Every opulent room, every luxury suite, every wine cellar, every hidden hallway, obliterated. The world's richest playground reduced to a fire-scarred wound on the mountain, and scattered around the ruins, half buried in ash and melting snow, were twisted soot-blackened bones, some still smoking. I woke up 3 days later in Calgary General Hospital, my arms wrapped in gauze, my skin bandaged from shoulder to hip. The burns weren't deep enough to kill me, but they hurt like hell. Walking was a battle. Swallowing hurt. Sleeping meant waking up gasping from visions of antlers and ice. Doctors hovered over me like I was a rare specimen. Severe trauma, hallucinations. Classic post-avalanche psychological shock. Probably watched others perish and dissociated. I kept telling them the same truth. It wasn't an avalanche that killed them. There was something else. A spirit. An ancient hunger. They weren't animals. They were. They'd always interrupt. Evelyn, the bones we recovered around the lodge? Blackened rib cages, long femurs? They're not human. They're not human anymore, I whispered. They stayed silent at that. No one ever looked me in the eye when I talked about it. They wrote notes, kept my chart flagged red for psychiatric evaluation required. To them, I was the lone survivor of a traumatic disaster who'd snapped under fear and starvation. A victim of a freak avalanche, a fire, and a series of unexplained panics among the wealthy guests. No matter how articulate I was, no matter how carefully I described every moment, my testimony was dismissed as hallucination, trauma-induced delusion, a chef's mind cracking under pressure. Rehabilitation was hell. My skin pulled tight with every movement. My right shoulder felt like it had been carved open with a serrated knife. My hands, blistered and raw, shook whenever I held anything heavier than a fork. But I healed, slower than they hoped, faster than I feared. On my last day at the hospital, when the psychiatrist asked the big question, I surprised even myself with the answer. What will you do now, Evelyn? After everything you've been through? I stared out the window at the city below. Shimmering glass towers, neon signs, a skyline built on indulgence and excess. It made my stomach churn. I said slowly, I think I've had enough luxury to last a lifetime. She waited, pen poised. I want to open a soup kitchen, I continued. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive. Just somewhere warm. Somewhere for people who actually need help. The psychiatrist blinked. That's a very grounded goal. Grounded, maybe for the first time in my life, because I'd seen what hunger could turn humans into, what greed could summon, what opulence could mask. I wanted the opposite. A small, humble place, a warm pot of stew. No crystal chandeliers, no champagne flights, no mountainside lodges full of ego and indulgence. Just meals, just kindness, and something real. I'm going to name this soup kitchen Cassiopeia, in memory of her.